What's up, guys? 3-2 last night, 3 winning days in a row. Northern Arizona with the outright upset win there. That line went up further, like through the 9.5 or something like that. I forget if I got somewhere in the 8.5 range, I think, on that one. And they just won the game outright. Didn't even matter. Minnesota didn't matter either. They just had a wire-to-wire win. I got a little bit worried about that because Minnesota did become the public favorite there, but it's like I don't get why the line was there, like why it was like so easy. I believe that Ohio State has not won a road game since January 1st of last year. That's just completely insane. Like true road games, Ohio State has not won one of those games in over a year. Like that almost seems like some sort of record or something. They're going on like 14 months without a road win. That's just crazy. Minnesota was able to do that pretty easily. Calgary Flames won in overtime. They never trailed in the game, although it got dicey. They had a 2-1 lead late in the third period, and the Bruins tied it. Unfortunately, going against my Bruins, a lot of mixed emotions, and then Calgary was still able to win the game in overtime. The other hockey game, totally misleading, dude. 5-1 loss for New Jersey, but if you look at the stats in that game, New Jersey outshot the Rangers 40-18. They got out hit by the Rangers, but they also won 57.6% of faceoffs. So even though New Jersey was, I guess, the more like finesse team, sort of, if you want to call it that, the Rangers were the more physical team by a bit, 26-17 in hits. New Jersey with a 40-18 shot discrepancy. That's not just because they were losing the game and just like flinging up like a ton of bad shots. I mean, that was part of it, but 40-18, that's just total domination in the in the amount of shots. I don't know how you have a 40-18 shot edge and lose the game 5-1. That's just terrible defense, terrible goaltending on the part of New Jersey. And then, of course, the Rangers, Shesterkin is one of the best goalies in the league. And that's an out of your mind type of performance there from Shesterkin. He almost shut New Jersey out in the entire game despite facing 40 shots. Saved 39 of them and gave up one right near the end when it didn't matter. Shesterkin, very, very good goalie. So New Jersey, I mean, that game, like I said, totally misleading. New Jersey dominated that game in a lot of the offensive categories there. No way that's a 5-1 loss type of game statistically. And then the NBA game didn't get there either, which that game, it was kind of all turnovers were the story of that game. Houston, 22 turnovers to New Orleans, 13. You can't win when you turn it over that much. New Orleans had 96 shot attempts to Houston's 82. You just can't do that, man. And on top of that, New Orleans shot a ridiculous 52.1% from the floor. You just can't do it that way, man. Houston actually had 10 more free throw attempts than New Orleans did, but only shot 64% from the free throw line, and the New Orleans was actually terrible at the free throw line too. Houston actually had one more rebound in the game than New Orleans. So there are things statistically about that game. Just outside of the turnovers, the game was much, much closer. So it's very unfortunate. We move on to today. I'm passing on the NHL card. It's only three games in the NHL today. Columbus is returning from a road trip, so I really don't like the spot that they're in, but the market looks like it's on them somehow, with Buffalo down from -155 to -137 as a road favorite, but the line dropping on them with 72% of the cash on Columbus and only 53% of tickets. So I don't really know what exactly is going on with that. I mean, it kind of makes sense that Buffalo would be the more like public team, I guess, because, I mean, who's going to want Columbus? They're awful. But Columbus returning home from a road trip, I would not want to touch that at all. Moving on to college basketball, I am going to be on 2 games in college basketball that caught my eye here. One is going to be to take the points with Bowling Green. I think I'm actually going out of order on this on the board, but Bowling Green was the first one that I looked at and said, yeah, I want to be on this one. This is kind of simple. This is a letdown spot for Toledo. Toledo not only just beat Ohio coming out of Toledo, played that ridiculous double overtime barn burner in the MAC Sunbelt Challenge there in a third straight road game at App State. So I think that game might have taken a lot out of them. They lost 109-104 in double OT, came back home, and they still won against Ohio, even though they didn't cover the game. against Ohio. Ohio was leading throughout the first half in that game by a pretty significant margin. Toledo came all the way back and wound up winning, even though they also had Akron up on deck. So that spot was really bad for Toledo. I think I had mentioned that I leaned to Ohio in that one. That was a pretty big sandwich spot. And Toledo had already won at Ohio, so I probably should have been on Ohio in that game because there was a little road reversal revenge. But Toledo still won the game. They just didn't cover. They got out of there with a 2-point win, then had to host Akron, who they had lost to already on the road. I wanted to even the score with Akron, and they did it. That was a huge win, beating Akron, who's the best team in the MAC. Toledo, probably the second best team in the MAC. I think those two teams are actually well above the rest of the field in the MAC, but that was a huge win for Toledo because Toledo had lost the first game to Akron, so they really did not. They could not afford to lose that game, really, if they want to get the 1 seed in the MAC or have any shot at it, really. Falling 2 games back of Akron and being 0-2 against Akron, they would have been done as far as that's concerned. It still looks like Akron kind of in the driver's seat to take the 1 seed in the MAC and be able to host the MAC tournament or whatever, but they're certainly not out of the water yet. They have the same record. It's just Akron has the better overall record, and Akron being the better team, I think they'll probably be able to do it. But big win for Toledo. So I think this is going to be a letdown spot. They have to go on the road to Bowling Green. I wish this was a sandwich spot and they had a better team up next than Northern Illinois, but they don't. But even so, I think this is still a letdown spot. Having to go out on the road, you're coming off that huge win over Akron. You're really coming off 3 pretty tough games in a row. At App State, the double OT game, then tough game against Ohio, who's really not a bad team, sitting at 4th in the MAC, then beating Akron, the top team in the MAC. Huge win. Possibly probably their best win of the season, really, because like who else has Toledo beaten this year? In the out of conference play, they lost all the to all the best teams that they faced in the out of conference. So that's actually their biggest win of the year, beating Akron. Huge win. Now they go out on the road to face Bowling Green, who's a team they already beat at home by 16 points, even though Bowling Green was winning throughout the first half in that game. Toledo turned it on in the second half and pretty much had a double-digit lead for most of the later half of the second half of that game. Wound up winning and covering and getting out of there with an easy win in that game. But possibly a little bit misleading in that game. If you look at the box score, Toledo shot out of their minds in that game. They shot almost 56% from the floor in that game. The amount of shots attempted were almost the same between Bowling Green and Toledo. Toledo had way more free throws as well. They had 10 more free throw attempts made, 5 more free throws, and they did dominate in the rebound category. But the 55.9% shooting is that's just crazy, and hitting 11 threes. That's pretty much where the entire difference came from in the game. Just having a much higher field goal percentage, hitting more threes, and hitting more free throws. So I think it might be a bit different this time around with Toledo not being in a very good focus spot. Bowling Green, on the other hand, I think they're going to be focused because, of course, they're playing Toledo, one of the top teams in the MAC. But Bowling Green's also lost 3 games in a row, but they're all on the road. And you might say, well, they're coming off a tough game against Central Michigan, who's in 3rd in the conference, and they played that game into overtime. I mean, yeah, that's true, but Central Michigan, definitely not as good as their record looks. So even though it was a tough game, on the road, I don't think it's going to hang over Bowling Green into this game. And Bowling Green, I think they're going to be focused on Toledo. This is their biggest game left. They have one of the top teams in the conference coming into their house, and it's a team that already beat them once. I think they're going to show up focused for Toledo, or Toledo coming off their big win of the season, facing a team they already beat by double digits earlier in the season, maybe not so much. So Bowling Green plus 4.5 or something like that. It looks like the line has gone up a little bit in the market from 3.5 to 4, it looks like. So maybe it was up in the 4.5 range and started coming back down. I don't know, but you might be able to get, it looks like there's still 4.5s out there and 4s. So Bowling Green plus 4.5. I think KenPom has this number at around 4, I believe. And let's see. Toledo is also a faster paced team than Bowling Green at 78th in tempo, and KenPom. Bowling Green a bit slower at 130th. So I don't know if you're going to say that means Bowling Green is going to be able to slow the tempo a little bit in this game and maybe try to keep Toledo in check a little bit, because Toledo likes to run more than Bowling Green does, although it's not that significant. Bowling Green is still in the top 50% really of the faster paced teams, but they play slower than Toledo does. So maybe they'll try to slow down that game a little bit, which is more conducive to covering as a home underdog as well. Moving to the other college basketball game I have, this line is moving. I'm on Cornell. This has gone up from 1 to 2. I saw it at 2.5 at some points this morning, but you could get the 1.5 overnight. I think you might still be able to get. I don't know if you can get 1.5 still. I see 2s and 2.5s out there right now. 2.5s mostly with reduced juice. I got a 1.5 overnight, so. 2, I think, is still fine. You're still kind of just playing Cornell to win the game. I think KenPom has this line at around 1. So KenPom has Yale as the better team, and the line is telling you Yale is the better team. But if we dig into this a little more, I don't like the spot for Yale here. And it looks like the market has moved up a little bit on Cornell, so there might be some market agreement on Cornell. Yale was undefeated in conference, and they had won a bunch of games in a row. 10 games in a row, and they were 8-0 in conference prior to their previous game where they went into Princeton and finally lost. They had already beaten Princeton at home. Princeton probably still the best team in the Ivy, at least looking at KenPom's rankings. He has Princeton still as the top team in the Ivy, even though they're sitting at third place with 2 losses, whereas Cornell and Yale each have 1. But Yale had not lost going all the way back to a game at Kansas on December 22nd. So they had not lost since December 22nd, since coming out of the Christmas break or whatever. They had not lost in 2024, had not lost in conference, and they finally lost to who I think is probably the best team in the conference, Princeton, who was a team they'd beaten at home. They went on the road and they lost to Princeton. The game was pretty competitive, really, even though Princeton won by double digits. The game was a bit closer than that for a lot of it. It was still close with like 10 minutes left in the game. Princeton was only winning by like 2 points with 10 or 11 minutes left. So it was a tough game, and Yale's coming off that. And now I think when you lose a long win streak like that, like Yale had, and you lose it to a good team, like in a game where you get up emotionally for it against Princeton, big game like that, I think that tends to hang you over in the next game, and you tend to not totally get it back together coming into the next game when it's a big game like that, and that ends a win streak that you had that goes way back, because you're just not used to losing really at that point. And then it's kind of a blow that kind of sends you back down to earth a little bit, and you don't know exactly what to do after that. So I don't like the spot for Yale for that reason. Coming off a tough game, but a game that ends such a long win streak and ends their undefeated status in the Ivy, and actually put them behind Cornell a little slightly, because Cornell has the better overall record, even though I think Yale is a slightly better team. But you might say, well, now that's going to cause them to be motivated against Cornell, right? Because now they fell behind Cornell. They're going to be angry, won't they? I'm not entirely sure about that, because you're coming off such a big game against Princeton that broke such a long loss streak. Like I said, I think that's a pretty bad spot, and this is a 3rd straight road game now for Yale. Yale's in the midst of their longest road stretch during the conference play. They're playing 4 straight road games, and now this is going to be a 3rd straight road game. I don't think it's an easy spot, and they did beat Cornell at home, although you might say, well, Yale was a 7.5 point favorite in that game, right, against Cornell, and Cornell played them really tough and almost beat them. So won't that also cause Yale to be focused because they got a scare out of Cornell? I'm not so sure about that. That angle works better when it's a team that's like definitively the much better team, even though the line is telling you Yale was the better team in that game. 7.5, maybe a little bit high for a number in that game. When you have a team that's like a definitively good team almost lose to like a definitively bad team, that's the situation where you then want to be on that good team in the second matchup, because they got a scare and almost lost to that bad team, because maybe that means they weren't focused in that first game, and now they're going to be focused in the next game. That's like reason for them to focus on a team they might otherwise not be focused on. That's not the case here when you're talking about 2 of the top teams in the Ivy. Like, they're both going to be focused as far as that's concerned. Like, they both want to win this game. So I think that just gets thrown out, really. Like, both these teams are going to be focused. There's no reason for them not to be, as far as like facing each other. Like, Yale knows Cornell is good. Cornell knows Yale is good. So I don't think that Yale being like scared in that first matchup is going to affect like their level of focus here. Like, that's not like they wouldn't have been unfocused for that reason. Like, they won't be unfocused coming into a game against Cornell. If it was a game against one of the bad teams in the Ivy, then I would say, yeah, that angle applies. They finally actually have reason to want to play against them. But no, like, it was just a tough battle between Yale and Cornell. that was a weird game, dude. Because if you look at that game, Yale completely dominated the boards and kind of dominated in the paint. So they had 41 rebounds to Cornell's 20. So it's like, yeah, Yale was obviously the more physical team, or the better team physically. And Cornell had 23 personal fouls to Yale's 14. Maybe some home cooking there, maybe some biased reffing, because Yale wound up with 27 free throw attempts to Cornell's 11, and Yale 21-8 from the free throw line. So that was more than the difference in the game just right there alone. Yale with 13 more free throw attempts, and they only won the game by 2. So that kind of tells you something, man. You might say, well, Yale dominated the game, like in rebounds, like in the physical aspect, in the paint. They had way more free throws, way more rebounds. So they totally dominated the game. But I kind of look at it like, how could you dominate the game that much and still almost lose the game? That tells me that Cornell was actually the better team in the game, even though a lot of it was just the shooting percentage. The amount of shots that the teams took were close to even, but Cornell had a much higher, they had a higher field goal percentage of 54.5%. Maybe that's not sustainable, but Yale didn't shoot that poorly at around 47%, 46.7%. So that's not too bad either. Cornell also took way more threes, but that's kind of their game. So Cornell hit 10 threes and Yale only hit 3. But Cornell's just the better shooting team. Yale is the better physical team. And a lot of times I like to go with the more physical team, the team with the better defense, I believe. And that is Yale. So a lot of times I would like to do that, especially when it's a team that's getting points. But in a case like this, that's not where I want to go with this one for a few different reasons. That game, looking at that game, the main takeaway there is that Cornell actually dominated the game, even though it was on the road at Yale. That game played to Cornell's pace, too. Cornell is the much faster paced team, which is another reason why I like the game here for Cornell. Ken Baum has Cornell at 24th in the country in tempo. Very, very fast team. And he has Yale almost on the complete other side of the spectrum at 311th in tempo. One of the slowest teams in the country, and Cornell one of the fastest. And Cornell was able to win out pace-wise in the game at Yale. So, if they could control the pace at Yale, even though, they wound up losing the game, it took massive free throw discrepancy for Yale to wind up winning that game. Cornell was completely blowing them out of the building, really. Had a double-digit lead for almost the entire first half, led almost the entire game. People might just look at the final score and say, well, Yale won the game in a close one. But no, Cornell was absolutely blowing them out for a lot of that game. Cornell had a huge lead. I think they were the better team in the game, despite getting dominated in some of the more predictable stats, the stats that I look at, and kind of the less predictable stats, like three-point shooting went Cornell's way. But that is Cornell's game. Like I said, they're the better offensive team. They're the better shooting team. So let me see here. Actually, looking at offensive efficiency, what do we got there? Yeah, Ken Baum does have Cornell, as the better offensive team, for sure, which is what I thought. But looking at that game, that just tells me that Cornell was able to control the pace of the game. Even on the road, they were able to speed it up and play the game to a 158 total, 80-78 final. So if Cornell can control the pace on the road at Yale, do you really think they're not going to be able to control the pace at home? Usually the home team has a much easier time controlling the pace. Yale couldn't even slow them down on their own floor. I don't think Yale's going to be able to slow Cornell down here, man. And I think Cornell's going to be more focused than Yale in this game, because Cornell, they took their first loss, which was to Yale, back a few games ago. So now Cornell's been able to put together a couple wins since then. They beat Harvard and Dartmouth. I don't think it's going to really matter. They played Dartmouth. They didn't really play Dartmouth that well, really. They were losing the entire first half to a bad Dartmouth team. It was the worst team in the Ivy, and I think Cornell was just not paying attention to Dartmouth. They'd already beat them once, even though that was a game I was on Dartmouth, actually. It was a bad spot for Cornell coming off a blowout win of Princeton. They played pretty badly at Dartmouth in that first matchup against Dartmouth, which apparently didn't cause them to totally focus against Dartmouth this time around, probably because they were looking ahead to this game still, and they just beaten Harvard. So they didn't totally focus on Dartmouth there. And with Yale up on the horizon as well. But they still were able to turn it around and get the win after Dartmouth was beating Cornell in the first half. Cornell turned it around and wound up winning somewhat easily there, but still not a great game for Cornell, coming off that only a 9-point win at home over Dartmouth. Probably they were a bigger favorite than that, right? Dartmouth sucks. I don't even see what the line was in that game, but coming out of that game, I like the fact that Cornell's on a 2-game win streak now, because they can carry their momentum into this game. They don't have a big game up until they face Princeton in the second last game of the season, not until March 2nd. So nothing to really look forward to. And Yale's the only team that's beaten them in the conference, man. So I like that aspect of it too. Like I say, when you have one loss in the conference, you remember who dealt you that loss. So even though it is Yale, and of course, these are the two teams that are sitting atop the Ivy. So it's not like Cornell's going to need another reason to focus, but maybe that'll just give them like even a little bit of additional motivation here, because the only loss they have in the conference to this point was the game on the road at Yale. And Cornell might feel like they should have won that game because they remember that, man. I think they remember being way ahead and blowing that game. And that's the only thing that's keeping them away from having an undefeated record in the Ivy, is that game at Yale where they were winning almost the entire game and wound up losing pretty much on like a free throw discrepancy. So I think that's going to make Cornell angry as well. I like the spot a lot better for Cornell here, and for all those reasons, I think Cornell, I think they'll be able to control the pace here and speed it up to their liking, because they were even able to do that at Yale. Yale coming off that kind of crushing blow that they just took against Princeton. I'm not sure they're going to have everything in order for this game here. A third straight road game, and having lost such a long win streak, I think that might shake them a little bit. So I like Cornell in this one. It's a long description there on the Cornell game, but that's Cornell minus 1.5 or whatever. And then going to the NBA, I'm going to be on one game, but this is like, I don't like this NBA slate at all, man. So many of these teams are on back-to-backs, and of course, you might say, well, don't you want to play against teams that are on back-to-backs? I mean, a lot of times, yes, I do want to play against teams that are on back-to-backs. Like I don't like teams that are on back-to-backs. So many of these teams that are playing tonight are on back-to-backs. And this big Friday slate, there was an even bigger Thursday slate, and most of these teams played yesterday. So you have matchups between two teams that both played on back-to-backs. But even the other matchups, you have a team that's on a back-to-back, but they're playing against a team that hasn't played since before the All-Star break. And you might say, well, that team's way more rested, right? Like, when you want to play the more rested team, not necessarily. I think it's kind of a wash, because even though that team's going to be the more rested team, if they haven't played for so long, they could come up like kind of rusty as well, even though like they might be ready to play defense, and they might be the more rested team and be able to play more intense defense. I think their offense might also be out of rhythm, having not played in so long. So I think it's both a positive and a negative, having not played in so long. Like the rest advantage, I think, is better when you have like a couple days off in the middle of the season and playing against a team that has no days off or something like that. That's when I think it becomes a real advantage. Teams having that long extended period off, I think it might be too long a period of time off. So I don't think it's as much of an advantage. So I don't really love that. I don't like any of that. So I'm staying off of most of these games. The game I'm going to be on is this one. Just feels wrong. And this is a game between two teams that actually did not play yesterday. This might be the only game on the board between two teams that didn't play yesterday. I'm not sure, but I'm going to be on the Milwaukee Bucks. Actually, +5, I was able to get it at overnight. It's sitting in the 4 range right now. So this line has moved in kind of some weird ways. It looks like it opened Minnesota 3.5, went up to 5, and now it's come back down from there. So some guys came in and started taking the 5, I think, and it's down to 4. Bucks look like they have the public action right now, though, 90% of tickets, but 93% of cash. So the line has moved down from the 5, which tells me there has been some action, some respected money driving the line towards the Bucks. Once it hit the 5, at least, going back down towards the Bucks, and the Bucks having the cash percentage discrepancy on them here, even though they are the public team. I'm actually kind of surprised that the Bucks would be the public team here, even though people might look at this and think this is a competitive game between two pretty good teams and want to take the points here. But is that really what they're going to do, given like these teams' recent play? And Minnesota, of course, having the better record over Milwaukee too. Milwaukee has really been struggling since Doc Rivers came in there, man, which I think that's going to cause people, I thought, to not want to play on the Bucks here. And look at what Minnesota's done, man. They went into the All-Star break on a 4-game win streak. So that is a situation where I'm going to want to play against a team that went into a prolonged break like this with a 4-game win streak, because that's going to disrupt their momentum, man. And during that road streak, all the games are on the road, and they beat the Bucks on the road and the Clippers, and then they won back-to-back road games against Portland. I mean, who cares about that? Portland sucks, but big wins against the Bucks and the Clippers. And the fact that they went into Milwaukee and beat the Bucks by 24 points, I think that gives us value on the Bucks here too, because this is kind of a little bit of a quick road reversal revenge scenario here where the Bucks, I think they're going to be angry, man. They know that this Minnesota team just came into their house and slaughtered them by 24 points. So the Bucks are going to have to do something here, man. They're going to be angry, I think. Whereas Minnesota, even though they don't really have anything coming up next, they might take the Bucks a little lightly here and not be like totally ready for this. Because during the break here, the All-Star break, they really had nothing to change because they were playing so well going into the break. They had no adjustments to make, whereas I think the Bucks are going to have all the adjustments to make. And Minnesota knows they're playing a team they just handled easily in their house, on their own floor at Milwaukee. So I think that might have a tendency to cause Minnesota to be a little bit complacent, whereas with the Bucks, they don't want to fall to a 33-20 record, or excuse me, they're 35-21. What am I saying? Never mind. Yeah, so they already have more. I was going to say they don't want to fall to a 20-loss team, but they already have more than 20 losses. Because I was looking at Minnesota's record. Excuse me. The Bucks have been playing so poorly since they got Doc Rivers. They've really struggled. They've had a bad time. I think that was a weird move when you're a winning team like this and like things are going fine for you, and you fire Adrian Griffin and bring in Doc Rivers. I mean, bring in a guy who's going to start implementing a new system. It's going to take time for your players to adjust to that, man. It's just weird that they would want to like make a jarring change like that in the middle of a season where things are going decently. And I think eventually, like, the Bucks will start playing better, and maybe it's going to start happening now, coming out of the All-Star break there, because I don't think they're not this bad. I mean, they have way too much talent to be playing as poorly as they have been playing. They've had some good performances mixed in there, like wins against like Denver, for instance. But going into the All-Star break, they lost 2 games at home to Miami and then at Memphis. I mean, that's just bad. So I like the Bucks to turn it around here, man. When they lost the last 2 games going into the break, and they were not playing well. They lost 5 of their last 7 games. I think that's going to cause them. And one of those was, of course, the home 24-point loss to this Minnesota T-Wolves team. I think that's going to cause the Bucks to turn around and be focused coming into this game, man, because I think they went into the break playing poorly. So I think they're going to have the adjustments to make coming out of the break. They're going to use that break to change something and turn something around here. I think they're gonna show up very focused here for a team that just destroyed them in their own house. And as bad as they've been playing, they had one good win, like I said, against the Denver Nuggets in there before they went on that 2-game loss streak there. Milwaukee, they're a much better team than what their recent play would tell you. I think we're getting maybe a few too many points here. That game at Milwaukee. That game at Milwaukee, Minnesota, was actually a road favorite. They were actually a 2.5-point road favorite, which seems really crazy to me. I don't see why that was the case. I don't think there were any significant injuries in that game, really, of significant players being out. That's crazy that – oh, no, excuse me. Damian Lillard did not play for Minnesota in that game. Excuse me. So All-Star Lillard did not play. And I would expect – I mean, he played during the All-Star stuff, so I would expect he's going to play in this game. So that might make that final score a little bit misleading, too, because Milwaukee was without one of their key players. Excuse me. They were without Damian Lillard in that game. So I believe he is going to play in this game. So I think that can only help them, too. So Milwaukee was a 2.5-point underdog in that game. But I think if Lillard was playing, it probably would have been closer to like a pick 'em, which would then kind of indicate that Minnesota should probably be maybe somewhere around like a 4-ish point favorite here or something like that. So right kind of around where so the number is actually kind of like close to being right here, I would say, with the 4. But I think once it got up to like 5, or maybe even given the situation, I think even the 4 is decent. I think Minnesota's only the slightly better team here. So I think this line maybe even 3.5 or 4 might be a more fair line here, because the NBA doesn't really have strong home court. It's not like college basketball. NBA really, I think you only get about 2 for home court. So this line might be a little bit heavy on the T-Wolves because of the recent performance. So I like the Milwaukee Bucks. I like the spot that they're in to start turning this around, and maybe having that extra time off, having adjustments to making, getting used to Doc Rivers' system there. I think it's going to help them. And having Damian Lillard back, where he missed that first game against Minnesota, and I assume he's playing tonight, right? He must be. Let me look at the game here real quick. We got Chris Middleton is out, but I think he's been out. I don't think he played in the other game against I forgot that he's been out for a while. I think I forgot about that. So he's been out for a while. I think Yeah, he hasn't played since February 6th, so he did not play in that game against Minnesota either. So I think that's kind of a wash. Like, he's out and he's still going to be out, so you don't have like a reverse injured player type of situation. I think Milwaukee at this point is used to playing without Middleton, so I think that's fully factored into the line, and I don't think it's going to really have that much of an impact versus like what the teams have been doing recently. So that's the only significant injury coming into this game. So one more time, my 3 plays today in college basketball: Bowling Green plus 4.5, Cornell minus 1.5, and in the NBA, the Milwaukee Bucks plus 5. Oh man, it feels tough to do. It feels ugly. When it feels ugly, it kind of indicates that maybe you're doing the right thing there. When it almost feels too difficult to do it. All right, man. Have a good one. Peace.